At Thanksgiving, my parents called my 7-year-old daughter a bastard. But what she said back made the entire table go dead quiet. No one had ever spoken to my parents like that. Stay with me for a moment while I tell you how everything really started. And if this story hits your heart, I'd love your support through a like, a share, and a simple subscribe. It truly helps more than you know. My name is Hannah Mercer, and all my life my parents, Leonard and Marjorie, have treated me like the mistake they never wanted. They weren't the kind of parents who yelled. They were worse. They judged. They controlled. They made every choice feel like an exam I was destined to fail. When I became a single mom at 23, their disappointment didn't just grow, it calcified. My daughter, Clara, came into this world with bright eyes and a laugh that felt like forgiveness. But raising her alone wasn't a choice I made. It was a choice forced on me. My ex-fiancé, Dawson Hale, walked out on us the moment he learned I was pregnant. No explanation, no goodbye. Just gone. And every time my parents looked at Clara, I could see the memory of that abandonment pressed into their eyes, as if her existence alone proved I had ruined my own life. Thanksgiving should be warm, family, gratitude, peace. But at my parents' house, it always felt like I was walking into a courtroom where I was already guilty. My brother Wyatt knew it too. He and his wife, Dana, would just sit quietly, pretending they didn't hear the sharp comments my parents threw like little knives. They were witnesses, not allies. This year, I almost didn't go. Honestly, I didn't want to. I didn't want to expose Clara to the coldness that lived in that house, or the way every smile felt forced, like it had to be approved first. But Clara was 7 now, old enough to understand holidays, old enough to ask why we didn't spend them with Grandma and Grandpa like other families do. I didn't want her to feel like she was missing something. I didn't want her to think she wasn't welcome in her own bloodline. So I packed up her little coat, braided her hair, and drove us there with a tight chest and a silent prayer that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. But something inside me already knew the truth. This Thanksgiving wasn't going to be peaceful. It wasn't going to be calm. It was going to reveal things I had tried to ignore, things my parents hoped would stay buried. And the moment they opened their mouths at that dinner table, everything shifted. I didn't know it yet, but this Thanksgiving would break open years of cruelty. It would show me the real reason my life turned out the way it did. And it would push me into a kind of revenge I never imagined taking. Not with anger, but with truth strong enough to tear their lies apart. Hannah packed Clara's small overnight bag while her daughter bounced around the living room, talking about pumpkin pie and how she wanted to show her grandparents the turkey drawing she made at school. Clara's excitement was pure, untouched by the heaviness that lived in Hannah's chest. Hannah forced a smile every time Clara looked her way, not wanting to dim that bright innocence. Inside, though, the old familiar dread had already started to crawl up her spine. Going home never felt like a visit. It felt like stepping back into a role she never wanted to play. On the drive there, Clara sang along to a kid's Thanksgiving song, kicking her feet happily. Hannah kept her eyes on the road, drifting into memories she wished she could erase. Growing up, she had always been the Mercer child who fell short, the one who didn't get the praise, the one whose achievements never measured up to Wyatt's. Wyatt, the golden boy, the college athlete, the stable job, the picture-perfect wife. And Hannah, the girl who made emotional decisions, the one who needed guidance, the one who always worried them. Even now, at 30, she could still hear her mother's voice saying, "We only push you because we want the best for you," right after pointing out everything she did wrong. By the time they pulled up to the Mercer home, Clara had stopped singing and was staring out the window. The house was big, tidy, and cold, just like Hannah remembered. When they reached the front porch, Marjorie opened the door with a tight smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Well, look who finally made it," she said, her voice coated in fake sweetness. Leonard stood behind her, arms crossed, giving Hannah a once-over like he was checking for flaws. Clara stepped forward and hugged them, eager and shy. Hannah saw the way Marjorie stiffened, the way Leonard barely patted her back. Then came the comments, softly spoken but sharp enough to cut. "You look tired, Hannah. Still working at that little job of yours? Clara's grown so much. Must be hard doing everything alone. It's a shame she doesn't have a stable father figure." Each sentence wore a smile, but the meaning was poison. Clara's small face started to tighten, her fingers fussing with the hem of her sweater as she watched the adults talk. She didn't understand the words, but she understood tone. And the tone was cold. Inside the house, the atmosphere grew heavier. Wyatt greeted her warmly, trying to bring some light into the room, cracking small jokes and asking Clara about school. But every attempt slipped straight into silence as Marjorie's eyes narrowed disapprovingly. Even Dana, usually cheerful, seemed tense and uncomfortable. It felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Hannah tried to stay calm, tried to ignore the sting of each disguised insult. But the tension was already building around her, thick like storm clouds gathering before a downpour. And deep down, she knew something worse was coming. The dining room looked like something out of a holiday magazine. Perfectly folded napkins, polished silverware, a golden turkey in the center of the table. If someone walked in without knowing the family, they might have thought this was a warm, welcoming Thanksgiving. But Hannah knew better. A beautiful table didn't fix the people sitting around it. Clara sat beside her, swinging her legs lightly, trying to smile even as she sensed the tension in the room. Everyone took their seats, and for a brief moment there was silence, the kind that feels like everyone is waiting for someone else to speak first. Wyatt attempted to break it by complimenting the food, but Leonard was quick to turn the moment into something colder. "Well, your mother worked hard on this dinner," he said, giving Marjorie a proud nod. Unlike some people who never quite learned responsibility. His eyes flicked toward Hannah for half a second, but long enough for the message to land. Small talk followed, but it carried the sharpness of hidden blades. Marjorie asked Hannah about work, but her tone suggested she already disapproved of whatever answer might come. Leonard commented on the traffic, then made a remark about how people who make poor life choices always end up stuck on the rough side of town. Everything they said was dipped in judgment, coated in disappointment. Clara reached for her fork politely, whispering a small "thank you," as Dana passed her the mashed potatoes. Marjorie immediately seized the moment to scold her. "Clara, sweetheart," elbows off the table. "And please don't take so much. We don't waste food here." Clara froze, her fork barely touching her plate. She wasn't misbehaving at all. She was doing everything right, but Marjorie delivered the criticism as if it was the only thing she knew how to do. Hannah gently touched Clara's back and whispered, "You're doing great, honey." But Leonard heard, and that opened another door. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and said almost casually, "You know, if Dawson had stayed, maybe Clara would have learned proper table manners from a real father." The room went still. Even the sound of silverware stopped. Clara looked up sharply, not fully understanding the words, but sensing their weight. Hannah felt heat rise in her chest, the kind that comes from being hit without warning. Dana stared down at her napkin, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Wyatt's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Hannah swallowed hard and kept her voice steady. "There's no need to bring Dawson into this. Clara is fine." But Leonard wasn't finished. "I'm just saying, children do better with two parents. That's not an opinion, it's proven." Marjorie nodded, adding quietly, "We only want what's best for her." Hannah gripped Clara's hand under the table, trying to protect her without making a scene. But every comment was getting sharper, closer to the edge she feared they would cross. The air felt thicker, like the room itself was holding on to something dangerous. And the worst part was knowing it wouldn't stop here. Not tonight. Not at this table. The comments were piling up, building towards something she could feel coming like a storm she had no way to escape. Everyone joined hands for grace, though the air was already thick with tension. Hannah held Clara's small fingers, trying to steady her own breathing. Wyatt began the prayer softly, thanking everyone for being together, trying to create some sense of peace. But before he could finish, Marjorie cut in with her own version of a blessing. "We're grateful for family," she said loudly, squeezing Wyatt's hand. "For real family, the ones built on proper foundations, not unfortunate circumstances." Hannah's stomach tightened, but she stayed silent. Clara looked up at her, unsure why her grandmother's tone felt strange. Wyatt's voice faltered, and the room shifted, like everyone felt something sliding in the wrong direction. Then Marjorie added, with a polite smile that didn't match her words, "And we pray that little ones who came into the world differently still find their place among us, even when they're illegitimate." Clara blinked. The word meant nothing to her yet, but she felt the sting in her mother's silence. Hannah felt her fingers go cold. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't speak. It was like her mind had been yanked backward to every other moment her parents had used shame as a weapon. Wyatt shot up slightly in his chair. "Mom, what the hell does that mean?" But before he could say more, Marjorie tightened her grip on his hand and hissed, "Sit down, Wyatt. This is a prayer." Hannah felt Clara's hand tug weakly at hers. "Mom." Clara whispered, her voice trembling, sensing something was wrong. But Leonard wasn't done. He leaned forward, as if this was the moment he'd been waiting for. "Let's not pretend," he said bluntly. "Clara is a bastard child raised by a reckless daughter who didn't think before ruining her own life." The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. Her fork slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. Dana gasped, covering her mouth. Wyatt's chair screeched as he stood halfway again, anger flashing across his face. Even Marjorie flinched at Leonard's harshness, though she didn't take it back. Clara's eyes widened. She didn't know the meaning of the words, but she understood something terrible had just been said about her. She looked from one adult to another, her small body stiffening, her expression twisting with the beginnings of fear and embarrassment. What does that mean?" she whispered. No one answered. No one breathed. Hannah felt something inside her break. Her heart collapsed under the weight of humiliation, rage, and helplessness. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked before any sound came. Her little girl, her sweet, kind, innocent Clara, had been attacked in the cruelest way by the people who were supposed to love her. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Every person at that table felt the sharpness of what had been said. Even the candles seemed to flicker uneasily, as if the room itself rejected the ugliness that had just filled it. And Hannah knew nothing would ever be the same again. Clara pushed back her chair so suddenly that the legs scraped across the floor. Everyone jumped a little. Her small hands were shaking, but when she stood, she lifted her chin the same way Hannah did whenever she was trying not to cry. Hannah reached out to stop her, but Clara gently pulled her hand away. "No, Mom. I want to say something." Her voice was soft, but the room felt instantly smaller, like every wall leaned in to hear her. She looked at her grandparents with eyes far older than 7 years. "Why does being born make me wrong?" she asked quietly. The words landed like stones. Leonard froze. Marjorie blinked rapidly, her lips parting as if she'd misheard the child. Wyatt swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on his niece, and Dana pressed a hand to her chest. Clara's voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "You said I shouldn't be here, that I'm a bastard. I don't know what that word means, but I know it's meant to hurt." Her lower lip wobbled for a moment, but she steadied herself. "Why would you want to hurt me?" Hannah felt her throat tighten, tears burning behind her eyes, but she didn't interrupt. Something powerful was happening, something that had been building for years. Clara wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, not letting herself fall apart. "My mom loves me enough for 10 parents, she said, her voice growing stronger. "She takes care of me, she reads to me, she makes me feel safe. She never makes me feel like I'm wrong just because I exist." Leonard shifted uncomfortably. Marjorie swallowed hard. Neither spoke. "And if being kind and loving my mom makes me a bastard," Clara continued, staring right at them, "then you can keep your meanness. I don't want it." The air snapped. It wasn't loud. It was silent, painfully silent, the kind that drops over a room when truth cuts sharper than any insult. No one breathed. No one dared move a muscle. Even the clicking of the old wall clock seemed to stop out of respect for the moment. Wyatt looked at his parents like he was seeing them for the first time. Dana had tears in her eyes, staring at Clara with stunned admiration. Hannah put a trembling hand over her mouth. She had never been more proud and more heartbroken at the same time. Her daughter, barely 7 years old, had stood up in a room full of adults and spoken with more courage than any of them had ever managed. Marjorie finally reacted. Her face flushed a deep red as she struggled to find words. "Clara, you don't speak to adults that way." But her voice cracked. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a child who wasn't screaming or throwing tantrums, but speaking with an honesty she couldn't control. Clara sat down slowly, breathing hard, her small shoulders trembling, but she didn't look away. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted. Forever. Hannah couldn't stay a second longer. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed Clara's coat, her purse, anything she could reach. The house felt poisoned, thick with words she could never erase. Clara stood close to her, still trembling from what she had said, and Hannah wrapped an arm around her as they headed for the door. Leonard called her name, but Hannah didn't look back. She pushed open the front door, letting the cold evening air hit her face. It felt cleaner than anything inside that house. She was halfway down the steps when Wyatt rushed out after her, his breath visible in the chill. "Hannah, wait, please." She didn't stop. Not until he stepped directly in front of her, blocking the path to her car. His eyes were red, and for once, he didn't look like the confident older brother who always did what their parents expected. He looked broken. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. Hannah held Clara's hand tighter. "Sorry for what? Sitting there while they tore my daughter apart? While they treated me like nothing?" Her voice was sharp, the pain bleeding through every word. Wyatt flinched but didn't move away. "I've been silent for years. I know that. I thought if I didn't challenge them, things wouldn't get worse." "They always get worse," Hannah whispered. Wyatt nodded, eyes dropping to the ground. I know. And that's why I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Hannah felt her stomach twist. "What?" He hesitated, too long, and guilt spread across his face like a confession already spoken. "It's about Dawson." Hannah froze. "What about him?" Her voice turned cold, sharper than the wind. I shouldn't have said anything," Wyatt muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, panicking. "Wyatt." Hannah stepped closer. "Tell me. Now." He looked at Clara, then back at his sister. The weight of years pressed on his shoulders. "Dawson didn't just leave because he was scared or weak or whatever you thought." Her chest tightened. "What are you saying?" Wyatt exhaled shakily. "Mom bribed him." Hannah's world stopped. "She bribed him to leave you," he continued, voice trembling. "She told him you were ruining your future, that getting rid of him would set you back on track. She gave him money. A lot. And she told him to disappear before you delivered." The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate. Hannah felt the ground tilt, her breath knocked out of her chest. Clara squeezed her hand, sensing the change, but Hannah couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her parents hadn't just judged her. They had engineered the pain that shaped her entire life. "You knew," Hannah whispered, her voice barely there. Wyatt's eyes filled with tears. "I was young. I didn't know how to fight them. And then time passed and it felt too late. Too late." The words scraped her heart raw. Rage rose inside her, deep, shaking, electric. Not the kind that made her want to scream, but the kind that clarified everything. A rage that came with purpose. Her parents didn't just hurt her. They stole her choice, her future, her family. And for the first time in her life, Hannah felt something she had never allowed herself to feel toward them. A need for justice. A need for revenge, slow, honest, and deserved. Hannah drove home with her hands shaking on the wheel, but her mind was clearer than it had been in years. She wasn't going to cry, collapse, or let anyone gaslight her again. Wyatt's confession had cracked the door open. Now she was going to kick it wide. She spent the entire night digging through storage boxes, old emails, deleted messages she had once been too hurt to read, and the faded paperwork she had shoved away when she was pregnant with Clara. Every piece she found matched Wyatt's story. Transfers made behind her back. Dawson's signature where it never should have been. Marjorie's name showing up on documents that had nothing to do with her. Even screenshots she once dismissed as stress hallucinations now made perfect sense. By morning, she wasn't heartbroken anymore. She was furious and ready. She drove straight to Dawson's apartment before he could leave for work. When he opened the door, his face drained of color like he had seen a ghost, and in a way he had. Hannah didn't scream. She didn't push. She just handed him the folder. "Explain," she said, her voice flat and cold. Dawson looked through the documents like each one burned his fingers. When he finally spoke, the words came out small. He admitted it, every bit of it. He had taken the money she saved for Clara's future. He had lied to her. He had chosen Marjorie over her because Marjorie threatened to ruin his early career if he didn't cooperate. Hearing him say it out loud didn't hurt Hannah the way she expected. It only confirmed that she had been right to walk away without looking back. Dawson's eyes welled when he mentioned Clara. He said he was sorry. He said Marjorie manipulated him. He said he wanted to know his daughter, even just a little. Hannah didn't flinch. She told him regret didn't erase what he did, and apologies didn't rebuild trust. She wasn't here for forgiveness. She wasn't here to comfort him. She was here for truth and leverage. She watched the hope in his shoulders fall when he realized she wasn't giving him a second chance. Not as a partner. Not as a father. Not as anything. But she wasn't done. On the drive back, she organized everything in the passenger seat: photos, statements, transfers, signatures, texts. She pieced them together like puzzle edges snapping into place. By the time she reached her street, she had a complete picture. A weapon. Evidence so solid that not even Leonard, with all his cold arrogance, could twist it. And Marjorie? Her iron-faced meddling was about to shatter. Hannah didn't want revenge that screamed. She wanted revenge that destroyed quietly, emotionally, socially, privately, right in the walls where they once called her family. And now she had everything she needed to strike. That night, as she spread the documents across her kitchen table, she whispered to herself, "They won't see this coming." And they wouldn't. Hannah sent the invitations with calm precision, making it sound like a simple family meeting. But the truth was, she was ready. She wanted them here, all of them, Leonard, Marjorie, Wyatt, Dana, and even Dawson. The air in her home felt lighter than the Mercer house, quiet and warm. The kind of quiet that allows confrontation to land harder. Clara helped set the table, nervous but proud to be included in her mother's plan. Hannah could see the determination in her daughter's eyes, the courage she had shown that Thanksgiving, and it steeled her resolve. When Leonard and Marjorie arrived, their smiles were tight, calculating. They had expected an apology, a timid explanation, some hand-wringing acknowledgement of the past. Instead, they were met with Hannah standing at the doorway, composed, holding a folder thick with evidence. "Thank you for coming," she said evenly, her voice calm but firm. "Please sit. We have a lot to discuss." Leonard's eyes flicked to Dawson, then back to Hannah, confused. "What is this about?" he asked, his tone laced with expectation, as if he were already preparing to lecture. Marjorie smoothed her skirt and leaned slightly forward, confident. Hannah didn't waste time. She laid the documents on the table, spreading them neatly so every signature, every transfer, every message was visible. "This is about the choices you made, about the lies you told, the plans you schemed, and the way you tried to control my life," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "Dawson took money because you threatened his career, and you bribed him to leave me during my pregnancy." Leonard's jaw tightened. Marjorie's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. Wyatt shifted uncomfortably in his chair, finally clearing his throat. "It's true," he said, voice trembling. "I stayed silent for years, and I know that made me complicit. I should have said something sooner." His hands shook as he placed them on the table, admitting the role he had played, however passive. Marjorie's composure cracked first. Her face went pale, lips quivering as she realized that no charm, no manipulation, no smugness could undo the proof staring back at her. Leonard leaned forward, trying to regain control, opening his mouth as if to spin a story, to redirect blame, but Hannah didn't flinch. Every attempt to gaslight was met with a calm, steady refusal to engage, and the room shifted under her authority. Dawson stood, looking down at Clara, and knelt so he was at her level. "Clara," he said, voice soft but sincere, "I'm sorry. I left because I was scared, and I let your grandmother make the decision for me. I'm sorry for not being there. I want to know you, if you'll let me." Clara's eyes widened, and Hannah saw the confusion, the hesitation, and the spark of forgiveness that didn't erase the past but recognized truth. Leonard opened his mouth to interrupt, to regain control, but the words faltered. He realized too late that the last illusion they had held over her, the perfect facade of family dominance, was gone. The room went quiet. Hannah, steady and unyielding, had reclaimed control, and the power they once wielded over her had crumbled entirely. This was no longer about anger. It was about justice, undeniable and undeniable. Hannah sat back, her hands folded over the edge of the table, her gaze steady on Leonard and Marjorie. The folders of evidence still lay between them, silent but loud with truth. "You're no longer welcome in our lives," she said clearly, her voice calm but firm. "Clara and I have built a life without manipulation, without fear, and we don't need your approval or interference anymore." Leonard's lips tightened into a thin line. He opened his mouth, clearly ready to argue, to blame, to insist he still had a say. Marjorie's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, a way to regain control, but there was none. Hannah's words hung in the room, final and unwavering. Wyatt cleared his throat. "She's right," he said quietly but firmly. He looked at his parents with a mix of disappointment and resolve. "I've lived too long under the weight of their expectations. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. But I can't anymore. I choose Hannah and Clara." He reached for Dana's hand, and together they stood. Dana's expression was a mix of relief and newfound freedom. "It's time," she said softly, and they left the room, closing the door on years of toxicity. Leonard and Marjorie were left staring at each other, the realization hitting them slowly, painfully. They had crafted a life around control and influence, and now they were alone. No allies, no obedient children, no one to prop up the illusion of their authority. They had isolated themselves entirely. The weight of their own arrogance pressed down, suffocating in its stillness. For the first time, they felt the absence of the power they had always assumed was theirs by birthright. Clara, sitting beside her mother, watched all of this with wide eyes. She had witnessed a small, personal revolution unfold. Hannah's calm, unwavering strength reshaped something inside her. The little girl had learned a lesson in courage, in self-respect, and in the quiet but undeniable force of truth. Strength didn't have to come from yelling or threats. It came from standing firm, from knowing your worth, and from refusing to let anyone dictate your life. Hannah reached over and squeezed Clara's hand. "You're safe now," she said gently. "No one can make you feel less than you are ever again." Clara nodded, absorbing her mother's words, the weight of them sinking in like a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. She understood, even at 7, that power had shifted, not with anger or revenge, but with truth and integrity. Leonard and Marjorie, still seated, finally recognized the reality of their situation. Every manipulation, every harsh word, every subtle humiliation had left them isolated. The control they had clung to for decades had slipped through their fingers. Hannah had not just survived. She had reclaimed everything they had tried to take from her. And as the room settled into an unfamiliar quiet, the balance of power was unmistakable. Hannah Mercer, once the child they deemed a disappointment, now held full authority over her life and her family. The tables had turned entirely, and the lesson was clear. The strength of a mother and the bond with her child was more powerful than any legacy of control or cruelty. Hannah finally stood free, the architect of her own life and the guardian of Clara's future. The evening air was calm, and for the first time in years, Hannah felt a peace that wasn't forced or temporary. She set a simple dinner on the table, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed vegetables, and lit a single candle in the center. Clara helped set the plates, her small hands eager to contribute, and Wyatt arrived with a quiet smile, carrying a bottle of sparkling juice. The atmosphere was warm, gentle, and safe, a stark contrast to the tension they had left behind. No judgment, no hidden cruelty, just family, chosen and real. Clara sat between Hannah and Wyatt, her small legs swinging under the table. She looked up at him with a shy grin. "Can I still call you Uncle Wyatt the Brave?" she asked, her voice bright with hope. Wyatt chuckled, a genuine laugh that seemed to loosen the last of the tension from his shoulders. "Of course, kiddo. Always brave, always for you," he said, ruffling her hair gently. Clara beamed, and Hannah felt a warmth in her chest, pride and relief mingling. The dinner continued in quiet conversation, simple laughter, and easy smiles. Dawson joined them later, stepping carefully into the space Hannah had carved out. He sat down across from Clara, giving her a small nod. "Hi, Clara," he said softly, his voice respectful. "I'd like to be part of your life, if that's okay." Hannah watched him closely, her eyes sharp but not unkind. He understood the boundaries. No overstepping, no pretending, no replacing what had been lost. Clara's small hand met his cautiously, and he squeezed it gently, silently promising patience and respect. Outside, Leonard and Marjorie made a few attempts to call and text, hoping to reconnect, to assert influence, or maybe to intimidate. Each time, there was no reply. Hannah didn't need to explain, didn't need to justify. Silence spoke louder than words. She had shown them the limits, and she wasn't about to retract them. The quiet refusal itself was a kind of justice, a reminder that control had shifted, that their attempts to dominate her life were meaningless now. As the night stretched on, Hannah looked at Clara and Wyatt across the table. There were no schemes, no manipulation, no old resentments hanging in the air, only honesty, safety, and love. This was her victory. Not in the tears or apologies she could have forced from her parents, not in outrage or revenge that screamed, but in the subtle, quiet triumph of building a family on her own terms. She had reclaimed her life, and with it, the kind of freedom that left no room for fear or regret. Clara giggled at a small joke Wyatt made, and Hannah found herself smiling genuinely, her heart lighter than it had been in decades. Dawson quietly helped clear the plates, always mindful of her rules. And Hannah knew deep down that the real revenge had already been achieved. She had proven to herself, and to anyone watching, that she didn't need approval from the people who tried to define her worth. She was free. She was strong. And the life she had built, small and imperfect and entirely hers, was more victorious than anything they could have taken from her. For Hannah, the story ended not with dramatic confrontation or forced forgiveness, but with emotional strength, dignity, and the quiet certainty that she had finally taken back her world. Do you think Hannah made the right choice by cutting her parents out of her life? Or should she have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to hear what you think. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story.